So normally we kind of cover two or three items on this call, but today we're just going to concentrate on one item. And to call it an item, I think is completely wrong. It's about remembering the magnificent person that was John Fox, who died about a month ago at home just outside Ulverston. Um, Dan and Hannah, who you can see in front of a very, very fine painting, or what is that behind you, Dan and Hannah, on your screen?
That is actually a small image that was on the side of one of the early welfare state trucks. They had various images and words on them like pathological optimists and guardians of the unpredictable. And this picture here is a still from a show called Up and Down Mooney. And actually the person in the center with I think it's a bear's head on, is Jamie Proud, who was one of the early members of welfare state, who also unfortunately recently passed away.
Great. All right. That's great. Great backdrop. Thank you. Thank you, Dan. We've got lots of images of John that we're going to share with you. And we're going to hear from Dan and Hannah as well. By the way, Dan is the oldest. Just clarified that beforehand. Dan is older than Hannah. I've got a little quote just going to start off with from the Guardian obituary that came out about John. And it starts in 1968 when John Fox and Sue Gill named their newly founded street theatre company the Welfare State. It was because they felt that free art was as important as free spectacles and free dentures. Their mission was to create art as an entertainment, an alternative, and a way of life, eschewing theatres and art venues in favour of streets and parks. They wanted eyes on stalks, not bums on seats. And I think that's quite a nice way to start off this conversation. So Dan and Hannah are going to share some thoughts and discussions between them for however long they want to. And then I'm very much going to open up to the floor. If you knew John, if you wanted to share any recollections or memories of John, then now is a great chance to do that as well. So that is the plan for this morning. So Dan and Hannah, I'm going to pass the baton over to you to tell us about your dad.
Thank you, Tom. Please, could you put that first picture of John up, Amy? So, good morning, everybody. So, yeah, I'm Hannah, and this is Dan. I am slightly younger, greyer, but slightly younger than Dan. So, we've been asked today to talk about John. Here he is. He's on the beach in this picture. Obviously, you know, we've recently lost John Fox, as we all have. We've also lost our dad, and it's still fairly raw, I feel. And we're sitting here at Dan's table, kind of surrounded by books, publications, images, articles that John's written and produced and generated. And, you know how prolific John was and how remarkable his mind was and his imagination. So it's quite hard to sort of pick any parts of that to talk about today, but we've got plenty to go at. So we thought we would just do a couple of presentation-y things to you and then just to have questions and that you can talk to us about anything you might want to about John.
Okay, so I'm going to read a short poem. When John found out that he'd got a diagnosis of terminal cancer, he produced this small book which he sent to 100 friends. Could you maybe just take that picture off for a moment? And yeah, I don't know if you can see, oh, it's doing a funny background screen thing. So there it is. He wrote this small pamphlet. And I'm just going to read a small section from this. I naively fantasized that if all the rifles in the world were replaced with saxophones, same factories, same metal presses, etc., more people would stay joyously alive in this undertaking. In this undertaking, vintage 1998 Thomas Lynch quotes from the old Dr. William Carlos Williams. Men die every day for what they miss in poetry. People are born and reborn every day who owe their very beings to poems. My other naive belief is that we all have an unusually undeveloped access to an inner creative consciousness and subconscious, an instinct which can open up our souls to new thought patterns and unexpected journeys, a different world and a different state of mind from being. Here's one of my songs from Foxy's songbook. Where will we be? Where will we be 100 years from now? Where will we be? Where will we be? When worms dance ecstatically in the flower pots of our skulls, when waves beat incessantly at the tower on the hill, where will we be? Where will we be? We lose our need to kill, and weapons will be banned. Every soldier on Boot Hill is rescued from the damned. We wish for simple things and for tranquility, where we help each other and every child that's born.
So when John was diagnosed with cancer, which was kind of around COVID time, pre-COVID actually, initially, he went on to have treatment and have operations that were, you know, grueling for him and Sue. But then he lived for a further 3 or 4 years, and in true John style, he just continued creating, writing, publishing, making. So the song that Dan has just quoted there is he collected in a songbook. Was it 100 songs? Foxy's songbook. Suddenly Foxy's songbook was happening, and he was putting together all the songs he's maybe written for shows and performances over decades with Tim Fleming, Pete Moser,
Luke
Michal, incredible musicians who are all over the world. So he had an innate need to create, but also a massive need to share and to communicate and to give away, quite frankly, to give the work away, to try and be a prompter for other people's creativity and other people's being together and collective and celebration. As I said, there are so many millions of things that we could have picked out today. There's a really interesting man, Francois Matarasso. I know that people will know him. And he has a website called A Restless Art and a whole movement of work that he does. And I just looked on Francois's website where he has a manifesto that John wrote, a new role for the artist. So this is another piece that I'll share with you now. This is John's writing, and it was from 2013, a new role for the artist. This is an extract. If art, which is currently maintained largely as product, is recolonized as a process, a vernacular process, which is sometimes playful and sometimes mind-bending, and is recognized as a mode of knowledge, an intuitive and lateral way of being that subverts the rational, then we are in with a chance. In such a context, an artist would become facilitator and fixer, celebrant and stage manager, a visionary linking the past and the future, a poetic diviner, a shamanic lasso, a trickster mongrel, revelator of layers of perception, and the holder of what used to be called spiritual energy. Equally, of course, this kind of artist would also acknowledge the artist in us all, and offer testament to the innate creativity recurring in every generation and every community, where the intuitive is given freedom to participate and collaborate, where regeneration is of the soul and not of economics, where a holistic way of being is given credence, and where making art is a daily experience for everyone. Let's get on with it. So that's the end of the quote. And I feel like that kind of exemplifies John in so much as he's, I mean, what a thinker, what a mind. I mean, we were baffled quite often, weren't we, by the John's amazing brain and intellect, quite frankly, way beyond all of us, me, you, us. But also John's kind of concrete tools and his complete respect for working with your hands, for being grounded on the earth, for the skills of everybody to come together to make art and change happen. And I hope that extract gives you that sense of how he viewed the world. And as we're sitting here in Ulverston now, Dan and I are looking out the window onto the Gill, where the flags are flying, you know, the beautiful silk flags that Ulverston celebrates with every May.
Chris was up a ladder.
Chris was up a ladder. Chris Dennett, there you are. So Ulverston, where we are now, we just thought we'd talk a little bit about festivals in Ulverston.
Yeah. Should we put on another the early picture of John maybe as well, just to there's one of him in a kind of 70s suit. I think it's the third one. Oh, so this is very early days in Burnley in Welfare State, and actually the handsome dude on the right hand side in the cut off denim jacket might be me. And there's various other, and Jamie is standing next to me, who I mentioned just earlier on, who recently passed away. And below that are other children who I'm still in contact with. George Howarth, the son of Maggie Howarth, who makes amazing cobbles, and he's taken on that business. And Billy Proud, Jamie's son, who's on the other side of the image. So yeah, this was like growing up in the early days of Welfare State. So kind of fully immersed in happenings and events and shows from a young age. So I think we had, when we were growing up, we lived in caravans, and we were itinerant. We had a showman's license, so which held sway with the police. So if you were en route somewhere and you pulled over, and the neighbours phoned up the police and said the Jippos have moved in, and the police came down within 20 minutes, we could show them our showman's license and say, look, we're en route somewhere, and it was fine. They said, okay, good, carry on. Obviously different days, a lot less traffic on the road and a lot less sort of busyness generally. But because we lived in caravans and we were itinerant, we would be moving around, sometimes into Europe, Poland, France. We did shows in Poland as well. It was very difficult to stay in school regularly, and several people within the company of Welfare State were trained as teachers, including Sue Gill, our mum. So we got a license to have our own school. So we would do lessons in various people's caravans at different points in the day. And it will also included some fairly practical lessons, like a maths lesson might be, we've got a show in Coventry and the Pantechnicon does 12 miles to the gallon, and a gallon costs whatever it did, 5p a gallon in those days. How much is it going to cost us to get to the gig? Those kinds of things, and also practical things. I made a poker with Jamie on a forge, kind of when I was 6 or 7, which I've still got now. And we would be involved in music practices. So we were always kind of part of the company. It was never like, oh, the kids can just. We did have our own tutor, so sometimes we would be having specific lessons, but generally we were working as part of the company, and felt on an equal level with all the adults. It wasn't like, oh, you're just a kid, you just do this. If we could play an instrument and we could only play 2 notes, then somebody would write us a part with 2 notes. So we felt sort of fully included with that.
And we were expected to have kind of some level of responsibilities, weren't we? So when we were in a show and we had a costume, we would need to kind of know where our costume was and set our own props and be ready for our cue. But it was a fabulously warm time. I certainly feel that a lot of our skills that we've developed, we learned in those days, and it was good fun. So
I think also maybe, Amy, at this stage, could you just start scrolling those other images that I sent through, please?
So I think
I'm just going to introduce these. There's basically, there's a whole archive of Welfare State slides that I've got that have been digitized. So I've just selected some of them from the early years, some I think from Flag Festival, Lantern Processions, workshops, various things. So they're in no real specific order, but they just I thought they just give a flavor of the kind of work that Welfare State's done over the decades.
I think it's an important time to mention Sue. As you know, Sue Gill is our mum and was John's partner, wife. She was born Susan Robinson. She became Susan Fox actually when she married John. And then she at a certain point chose her own name, Sue Gill, who she's known professionally as and as friends now. So it's really important to sort of bring her into the conversation around that collaborative creative partnership that they had. So we were family, we were creative family, we were on the road with all these other amazing creative people. But Sue and John, obviously, as a partnership, it was essential. They were the two sides of a ladder, you know, holding up. Neither one would particularly be as I suppose as prolific without the other. Maybe there's a book they've written recently called 80 something. They wrote this together, a lifetime of conversation. And they just describe it as some essays from two 80-year-olds whose lifelong creative partnership has been spent seeking a role for art that weaves it into the fabric of our lives. So it's really important to mention Sue.
That's John, actually.
That's John with a volcano in a pram in Burnley. So just coming back to Ulverston and festivals, as I say, flag festivals and Ulverston Lantern Procession, as a model of a project, you know, began, I don't know how many years ago. Chris will remember.
Welford Estate, we moved to Ulverston when I was about 10 and Hannah was about 8, and we still lived in our showman's wagon at the Barnsley Caravan site for a year until we moved into a house on the Gill. And this is our mum Sue doing a tap dance routine in Heselford Quarry in Burnley, and it's probably early 70s as part of a performance. And so that when we moved to Ulverston, it's really when Welford Estate stopped doing all the nomadic touring. We had a base in the old Trinity schoolrooms, and then many years later, Lantern House was developed, which was one of the first. Welford Estate bought an old school, and then in the early days of the lottery, this was one of the first artists and architects collaborating on the design of a building. So it was a sort of artist toolbox as a kind of one of the first creation spaces in the country. And that really solidified the company being here and running workshops. And then many artists, young artists, would come and work with the company in many different roles, some as sort of cooks or musicians or makers or performers. And it was a really good sort of productive time. Lots of people who now run their own arts companies might have been there at that time. So we were just thinking about some of the companies. I mean, Maddie is on the call. Maddie was very much there in the early days of Welford Estate, doing amazing paintings and murals in the building. And then other companies like Dog Troop, or a Dutch company who Hannah and I both worked with in Amsterdam for several years, who did large-scale outdoor site-specific work. And Walk the Plank, based in Manchester, John and Liz, who founded that company, worked with Welford Estate a lot. IOU were a company that split off from Welford Estate quite early on. And then London-based company Emergency Exit Arts, who do a lot of large-scale community participatory work in London. Whitewood and Fleming, B Arts, and
Liverpool Lantern Company.
Yeah. Lantern Company in Liverpool, who now do who actually I'm now working with again on other projects. So lots of people, there's a lot of, it feels like a family of people. A lot of people have stayed very sort of connected, and we might not work together all the time, but occasionally we do. And then just feels like there's quite a deeper understanding of the language of what it can shortcut quite a lot of discussion, because people just understand what you mean when in a couple of sentences by a description of what's going to happen on an outdoor show, maybe.
So as you can see, Dan and I are artists in our own right, and we work independently, separately, together with other companies, but we worked so much with John, and we thought it might be fun to just mention a couple of projects, just as how it was as a collaborative experience working with him, tiny and large. So a project I worked on with John, just the two of us actually, a few years ago, I don't know, 5 or 6 years, no, longer, 7 years ago, was the Fishing Hut project. And it was, he and I were asked by Morecambe Bay Partnership, run at the time by Susanna Bleakley, who had a huge audio collection of oral recordings of families that fished around Morecambe Bay, hours and hours of it. And we were asked to be two artists. There were others as well who did other projects, but we made a project called the Fishing Hut, where we listened to the archive, we distilled it, and we had a creative response to that. So John made a beautiful set of images, posters, cards, and stories, and I made animations actually, and then we pulled everything together. It was quite tiny. It was almost like a really exciting little gallery that we made into a wooden shed that we then took back around Morecambe Bay to all the places where all these families were living residentially around Morecambe Bay, fishing the bay. So we took it back to sort of Grange Prom and Fluteborough and Morecambe Prom and all the way, and car parks around Arnside and so on, to get the work back out into the street. Do you want to talk about one of yours?
Yeah. So John worked in a lot of different mediums. He was a writer and thinker, but also a visual artist. So he did woodcuts, lino cuts, painting, made things out of clay. He would tell us that when he was 10 years old, his father, Captain Horatio Herbert Fox, was a merchant sea captain, and was often away a lot. And John, at the age of 10, started making Punch and Judy puppets by making his own papier-mâché by boiling up bones to make size and mixing it with newspaper. And nobody knows really where this came from, because there were no other artists in the family, and they thought it was a bit weird. But he started making these little puppets and painting them, and then doing shows for his mates for a couple of pence, I think. And so he was also a musician. He played saxophone and clarinet his whole life. Although when he was young, he'd been saving up for a clarinet, and he was working at the time when I think he was about 16 in a process pea factory, I think, in Scarborough. And he just about saved enough money for the saxophone, and then he had a crash with the trolley and it knocked his front teeth out. So for his whole life, he had a palate but he still managed to start playing clarinet and saxophone. But he also would use he started loving to draw on the iPad, and in about 10 years ago, I have some mobile sound systems on tricycles, and I added video projectors to them with the idea of trying to do a new kind of processional performance, which was a mixture of live music amplified through the boom bikes, they're called, and with projections that we could manually project onto architecture and the ground. So we could walk along and move these projectors, and I wanted to have animated loops of images. I collaborated with John to make the images on that, and we made a piece called On the Edge of a Rising Tide, which was premiered at Light at Lancaster, and it was a piece about tidal rise. So and in the previous year to this show, Lancaster had actually been, areas of Lancaster have been underwater because of sort of tidal influx. So we were performing in areas that had been underwater. So we were imagining the creatures that had come out of the bay and were then inhabiting the walls. So there were everything from mollusks and small fish, flatfish, lugworms. And John did beautiful drawings of these on the iPad. And then I worked with an animator to turn them into moving images. And we did this. We did that several times on various projects, and he always had a good sense of I mean, his animated drawings almost looked like Punch and Judy puppets as well. Like there was always a kind of a sort of roughness in his style, and I think how would you describe?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of took a woodcut approach to an iPad, I would say.
Yeah, not with an actual chisel on it, but you did press quite hard with the stylus.
But I think it kind of highlights is how he was never afraid to try new things, and he was excited about exploring the possibilities of an iPad and a drawing pencil, an Apple Pencil on an iPad, and he was absolutely always about looking forward and new creations, wasn't he?
Yeah, and whether that's printing using waterproof paper that he could put outside the house, or
getting images laser cut, because he's maybe made some beautiful paper cuts that he thinks, oh, I want these to exist outside. I'm going to get them, water jet cut in aluminium so they'll exist on the beach. So he was always looking forward, bringing together new technologies with old skills, and never afraid to experiment.
And he would always seem to come back with some story with the guy who does the local laser engraving, which is normally like the latest name of the winning football team on the side of a cup, but would then be doing kind of Mr. Punch playing a saxophone laser cut out of some aluminium sheet, and he would always seem to make a connection with people. And because it was something pretty off the wall for their normal run-of-the-mill kind of work, but they always seem to sort of connect, and he always found an interest in that person that he was working with.
I think for us in this experience of his death, and we can speak a little bit further at the end maybe about kind of the lovely kind of letters and reflections that we and Sue have had in this experience. One of the main things that I think has been spoken about time and time again is not only what an incredible sort of creative he was, and an artist and a thinker, but also what a lovely man he was, but particularly around how whenever you would meet him, he would absolutely have that time to look you in the eye and speak with you about what you're doing. And so he was very able to connect directly, as Dan, as you've just said, with the person he's with in that moment. And I think that's come through a lot of conversations we've had with people.
Yeah, and he would also remember that conversation, and then think he was a great collector of cutting articles out of various newspapers, and it might be 6 months down the line, you say, oh, that conversation we had about something specific, I found this article that you might find interesting, or here's this book, have a look at this. And
it might be somebody's granddaughter who's living away, who's the granddaughter of a neighbour that he met when he was down at the swimming baths in Ulverston. I mean, it was sometimes extremely removed from his daily experience, wasn't it? But he would remember, and he would care, and he would want to support other people and offer up things that he'd found, and creativity, and in a supportive way. Should we speak briefly about Longline? You begin.
So the last performance that Welfare State did, was it 2006?
I'm not sure.
I think it was Welfare State finished, I think it was 2006. The company had become it had become quite bureaucratic in the board had too much control, and the building took too much energy and too much money, and there were sort of a lot of staff, and it was from the early days of jumping out of the back of a truck with some oil drums and just doing art. The building seemed to sort of suck some of that energy out of it, and it became about employment law and a lot of things not to do with making art. And there was sort of decision to basically stop, and so that John and Sue could concentrate on making art and doing their own work, and not have to be art centre managers and everything that goes with that. So the company, and because it's set up as a charity, was handed over to a new organisation. And the last show that we did was called Longline, and it was sort of going right back to the roots of Welfare State. In the early 70s, there was a project called the Life and Trials of Sir Lancelot Barabbas Quayle. I think that maybe that shot of John with the volcano was possibly part of that, where it was basically a tour of the southwest of England, with a circus tent, a big circus tent, and lots of vehicles that are all painted bright yellow, school buses, old army trucks, hearses, and it would go from town to town, and this circus tent would be put up, but it wasn't a circus show. It was very much a more avant-garde happening, kind of process music and performance, and kind of surreal imagery. And a lot of the work was done with performers walking between the sites as well. So the return to use it. So we got a circus tent basically, which was put up on the site of the warehouse, and the performance was made in that show. I think it was March or April, wasn't it? And it snowed. It was very cold. And then lots of people were involved with that show. So it was performed for several nights, wasn't it?
The local schools, primary schools, secondary schools, big choir, youth performance group that Nolene Kavanagh, this amazing woman that came to work with us, spent probably a year developing. There were musicians, there were opera singer, there were rappers, there was film, there was shadow puppetry.
In fact, Simon Hansen, who's somebody that I work with a lot now, he just moved to Ulverston, and we needed a sound engineer, and somebody said, "Oh, I hear this guy's a sound engineer," so we got him involved. He's like, "Great, come on board," and he was the engineer for the gig, and I now work with him all the time.
And it had a kind of ritual quality, didn't it? That it was, yes, it was performance, yes, it was a pageant and a kind of carnival in that circus tent, but it was also a ritual around a community coming together and saying goodbye. We used a lot of local stories that John had developed over many years. There was, for example, Gladys, a woman who was a bed and breakfast owner over in Morecambe. He'd worked with her and around her story about being a child in Morecambe and the pier being on fire. You can imagine this kind of what this would do in John's mind. And what's that lovely fisherman called that was on a guy that was a fisherman on Jack Manning. We all have heard of Jack Manning on a quad bike with his grandson on the bay, cockle picking and shrimping. And so John used real stories of real local people, and we wove them into these stories became tiny puppets. I was a performer in that show as a kind of a ritual maker with sand and rocks and tiny puppets. Then that we had Bunraku puppets who scaled up these people, and then they flew away in a kind of mythic ship, didn't they? That was just like Matisse. I mean, come on, it's all John's love of Matisse was evident throughout his whole life. I think these beautiful flying images of flying boats. He put wings on everything, and if they didn't have just wings, it probably had wheels as well,
and a ladder
and a moon. And then we went outside from that show, but it was, I think Neil Wade here, you're on this call, and I know that Joe was in the choir, and and your daughter was in the performance, and it was wonderful. It was incredibly sad and exhausting and wonderful. This is a little picture of Dan Fox in a ceremonial something
I think it's like Chester Cathedral or something.
In Chester Cathedral. Yeah. I'll tell you a very rude story, which is something that I was told recently, where apparently when I was about 2 and I was on a gig somewhere and it was very ceremonial, and I pissed in the ceremonial sand apparently as a toddler. Anyway. This was called Falls Creek. This was at the Expo in Canada, and it turned out that Welfare State was invited to work on the Expo, and it was all it was all financed by a corrupt porn king who made his money out of selling porn in Vancouver, and they cleared what had been a Native American Canadian American burial site to create this expo site, but it was also the sort of slum area of Vancouver, and there were lots of slum hotels being cleared and sort of old guys jumping out of windows because they didn't have anywhere to go. And there was soup kitchens, and it was quite extreme. So a lot of the local artists boycotted coming to the expo for that gig, and basically this show was a sort of tale of Pinocchio, and it just kind of revealed how rotten the whole expo process was from the inside out. It was performed on the expo site, and by the time
the expo bosses kind of found out actually what it was about, it was too late because it was already happening. But it was one of the only shows that and we collaborated with quite a few local artists on that show, and it was one of the only events that a lot of the local community would actually come onto the expo site to see. I actually had to do my O-level environmental science exam in the local British Embassy because I was missing school to do that, and the school didn't want to let me do it. Sue, my mum, had to really fight for that to get them to send the exam there so I can do it, and I think I passed.
So
Dan and Hannah, I'm just going to invite you just to sort of draw some thoughts together in the last few minutes, and we'll come back to you before the end. But I'm keen to open it up to other people to share their thoughts as well. So just a few more minutes.
Is it all right to put John's photograph of him playing the saxophone back on, Amy?
Yeah, good idea.
Or on. Thank you. So
just before Hannah, if you've got any thoughts or reflections of John that you'd like to share, just start to park them up in your mind, and we'll come on to those shortly. Thank you, Hannah.
Of course, yeah. So we wanted to just conclude really by mentioning. So there's a lovely picture of John, I think, coming up in a minute with him playing the sax. So as you know, Blast Furnace, the amazing street band. Next one, please. Yeah, that one. The amazing street band, who Neil is in the band, also born out of Ulverston's creativity. And John played, I think, his last gig with Blast Furnace actually it was the Dickensian Festival just before Christmas. I remember he was pretty much sitting on a chair at that point, but he would still stand up and make the announcements. So yeah, John was doing this until very, very recently. And also we just wanted to mention that as Welfare State ended, and then John moved away from Lantern House, he and Sue have their company, and they began operating as Dead Good Guides, and that's really important to say because that's still an ongoing company that Sue has now with other collaborators. Dead Good Guides.
Dead Good Guides is also their website, and her and Julie Adams do a couple of rites of passage courses each year. I think there's one coming up locally in September.
Yeah. So I think should we conclude there? We've got a lovely little thing we'd like to maybe read just to finish.
There were just so many amazing, John's creative ripples have sort of spread so far, and so many amazing sort of little tributes and things written to him, which were on sort of Facebook and social media and so on, and then a whole pile of letters and cards. And this is just one letter from Liz Nuttall. I've just arrived home from a trip abroad to hear the news that John has died. I'm so sorry. He was one of those people whose enthusiasm for life and art seemed inexhaustible, that he could go on forever. In many ways, he will, as his work in the field of carnival, spectacle, and community involvement in making theatre has pushed the boundaries of performance. It was a privilege to know him. He was larger than life.
That last bit, there's absolutely no argument. He was definitely larger than life. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Hannah, for some wonderful memories and anecdotes, and those images as you were talking, those images just bubbling along, just incredible creativity and ambition and wonderment and such happiness to so many people. Right, we'll come back to Dan and Hannah before we finish in about 18 or 90 minutes time. But if anybody wanted to share any reflections of John, just stick your hand up, either electronically or I can absolutely see your hand going up, although we've got two screens this morning. And we'll hear from you. The first person that I just want to show you is, she can't be here this morning, but Rachel Ashton, who some of you will know, runs a great creative organisation in Barrow. And she just got in touch to say, could she make a little film to show what she thought about John and how John had influenced her as well. So, Amy, if you can bring up the Rachel Ashton film, we'll just see what Rachel's got to say.
Hello everyone, I'm Rachel Ashton. I'm artistic director of Theatre Factory, which is based in Barrow. I came up here in 1989 to work for John Fox, Welfare State, as a community theatre performance director, and I never left. John taught me everything I know about arts in community. I owe him an enormous debt of gratitude. I wouldn't still be here if it wasn't for them. I think they welfare state spawned, I think that's the right word, a whole generation of young artists who all went on to set up companies or to work collectively in the UK and internationally. We're really grateful for that. He took a risk on a very young, relatively unknown theatre director, and yeah, I'll miss him. Hello everyone, I'm
Thanks, Amy. Lovely thoughts from Rachel there in Barrow. Would anyone else like to contribute any memories? Antoinette.
Hi everyone, I'm Antoinette Fawcett, and I suppose I represent the Norman Nicholson Society. I'm on the committee of the Norman Nicholson Society, but that's not what I want to talk about. I want to talk also about how grateful I am to John and Sue and how inspiring I found their work as a young teacher. So I first met John in 1982. And I can date it absolutely precisely to Easter 1982, to my birthday, April the 9th, when the Falklands had been invaded and the local C&D group, of which I was the secretary, had decided to put on a vigil. The initial vigil was about nuclear weapons, and then coincidentally, the Falklands were invaded, and it became also about the Falklands and taking nuclear weapons down to the Falkland Isles. And we put on a little play to attract people's attention. I had no idea about street theatre at that point, but I was a drama teacher as well as an English teacher. And John watched the play, which was very, very amateur, and then he came and said some nice things about it, and also gave me some advice about how to project your character when you were performing in public in the street as opposed to on the stage, and so on. And then my teaching career took me abroad, and I would say that many of the ideas that I saw John's company Welfare State involved in Ulverston, I tried to bring into my own work with the students that I was teaching. And when Glenn and I came back to Ulverston in 2001, we had many students visiting us for several years, and we used to take them to the Lantern House and show what had happened to the company. So John, Sue, Hannah, and Dan have actually been part of my life for a long time. And for several years, I volunteered at the Lantern House in that period when we came back. So I just wanted to say thank you. And I agree totally with what Hannah said, that John always found a point of connection with everybody. He was just so kind, generous, warm, imaginative, creative. I don't know, I could pile it on, but he has been, and it may surprise you, part of my life since 1982, specifically.
Thank you, Antoinette.
Thank you.
What a legacy. And by the way, what an amazing job you've done with the Norman Nicholson Society as well.
Thank you.
That's a lovely, lovely legacy, and going back all those years. What I remember about John, the 2 or 3 times I met him, he always had a notebook with him. He was always making notes about something. I remember when I went down to interview him for the podcast for the network to John and Sue's house. Sue had made this beautiful soup that we had for lunch. And John was just constantly making notes in his notebook about all sorts of things. And occasionally Sue would have to sort of say, right, John, put your notebook down. It's time to have some soup or whatever. But and it was always
when my kids would be, or our kids would be in the school sort of nativity plays or whatever, mostly at Leven Valley School, and John and Sue would come and see the show, and John, you know, they're not the highest quality theatrical endeavors, trying to cram 35 kids into a sweaty school hall. But John would also have his notebook at those, and he would be drawing all the characters in the book and the other members of the audience.
a creative 100% of the time. Any other reflections, any other thoughts from anyone about John? Zsuzsa, come off mute and tell us how you knew John.
Hi. I met John at a course he was running down in Devon, I think it was, and then I later came up to Ulverston to work on Lantern House. You touched on this. I mean, his creativity and his teaching skill were incredible. I think the really unique thing for me about him was I'm the daughter of a migrant and a working class Londoner. Neither migrants nor working class people generally can entertain the notion of creative life, because it's all about economics and laying down financial foundations for the future. And with John, I found somebody who made it possible to live a creative life. And the thing I most admired in him and have really tried to carry forward, and that's another thing, is the ripples he creates, because everybody affected does that. So the impact he's had on the world is enormous. So it's the fact that class and culture, everybody was treated equally in a way that I have never experienced with anybody else. He valued every human being equally for who they were, and he believed that you could do whatever you wanted to do. And that notion of play, it's okay to create things that aren't very good. It wasn't about quality, it wasn't about its economic recompense, it wasn't anything about that. It was being creative for the sake of creativity in itself, for your own pleasure and for the pleasure of those people around you. I just think that's such an important message. More and more, it's such an important message, because it's the key to our personal fulfillment, our function in the world. So I have much to thank him for. There's not a day. I mean, he brought me to Ulverston. There's not a day where I don't walk in Ulverston, and I'm grateful to him for that, and for just opening up the possibility of a life that I treasure. So, and well done, both of you, for getting through that without getting emotional, because I'm not managing it. But yeah, I owe him a great deal.
Thank you.
Beautifully spoken, Zsuzsa. Thank you. Ripples, yeah, definitely ripples. Evidence this morning, and in so many different ways as well. Does anybody else want to say anything? Helen?
I only met him once, but I did actually see the raising of the Titanic when I was about 25. And it was,
tell us what that was. That was in London, wasn't it?
It was enormous, massive, extraordinary performance of God. I mean, yeah, I'd never seen anything like it. It was I can't remember. Was it
Limehouse Dock?
Limehouse? Yeah, I was trying to remember where it was, and it was in the East End. And
Before Canary Wharf was built.
Yeah. And it was incredible. And so I knew about Welfare State. I knew who they were. And then years later, I went to work for Border Television, for my sins, in Carlisle. And I worked on a Saturday morning kids show called Get Fresh that had a puppet called Gilbert the Alien. And our puppeteer was one of the kids from Ulverston who trained as a puppeteer with Welfare State, and I can't remember his name, but he said all the puppeteers come from Welfare State,
Called John?
Yeah,
John Eccleston.
Yes, that's it. Yeah. And then again, years later, when a friend of mine, Lol Coxhill, the saxophonist, who had worked with Welfare State as the musical director, when he died, there was a memorial concert organised for Lol, and John Fox did the most brilliant entrance. Were you in it, Dan? I can't remember.
No.
There was a performance coming, a procession. Yeah. It was at the folk dance society, a beautiful building, and he organised a procession of musicians coming into the entrance and then through the hall and then onto the stage, and it was brilliant. And then he gave the most wonderful eulogy to Lowell, which I've actually recently posted it on the Cumbria Art and Culture Network, because it got shown at New York University 2 weeks ago.
Wow.
Because they were doing,
It's on YouTube, Helen. I was looking
yeah,
at something and I came across that.
well, they wanted to do an afternoon about Lowell Coxhill, so I sent them John's eulogy, and he was doing that full time by then, wasn't he? That was his gig, organising amazing funerals. So yeah, it was such a good thing to have, and then also he did see my film, because it was commissioned by Full of Noises, and I went and picked John up from his house and got him to come and see it, and he just sat there and cried, actually, which was very moving, because he didn't want to come, he couldn't be bothered, he didn't think it was that big a deal, and then when he came, he was very moved by it. So
Thank you, Helen.
Nice.
Thank you. Lovely memories. And those connections as well, and those ripples keep coming through. I'm just looking at all in chat as well. Some lovely thoughts from Virginia, and from Kate Brandrit, and also from Cherry, who's full of cold, talking about John was a major presence in the arts in Cumbria. I've been aware of all the wonderful work he did since I started working in Cumbria in the 1980s. His contribution to people's lives will not be forgotten, and the ripples continue to expand. Thank you for this wonderful celebration of his life. Thank you, Cherry. Would anyone else probably got time for another couple of contributions before we finish? Would anyone, Maddie?
So yeah, I'm surprised that you haven't got tearful, because I have. Yeah, great man. I would not have been here had it not been for you and Sue and John. So thank you. And I came here in 1989 to do a year residency, a real big effect. Rachel Ashton and Kev Fegan and myself were sort of residency artists for a year over in Ulverston. And yeah, we set about Jean because of John and because of the work. So just to say thank you. He's a lovely man, and he gave a lovely sort of poem at Stuart's funeral recently. So yeah, thank you. I'm sorry, I can't say anything else, but well done for not crying, you two.
Thank you.
Thank you, Maddie.
Thank you, Maddie. And what Art Gene does is absolutely something that goes in exactly the same direction of what John was about, and what we're all about here, promulgating creativity across the county and beyond. Thank you, Maddie. Anyone else before we conclude? This has been a lovely hour, by the way. And Dan and Hannah, thank you so much for all that you've spoken so much. Sorry, that was screen two. Who did you say, Kate?
Neil.
Neil, off you go, Neil.
Hi, yes. I mean, I've known John since we moved to Ulverston in '87 and been involved in blast furnace and lots of things at Welfare State, and it's had a real impact on our lives. Just opened up creativity, and as other people said, he was always there for people, and always willing to chat and interested in what you were doing. And like Dan was saying, whenever we went on gigs, he'd be on the minibus with his notepad, scribbling and drawing and making notes, and always you could see his mind constantly whirring, and it was just amazing. Yeah, no, thanks, John. It's a great life.
Thank you, Neil.
Thank you.
Thank you, Neil.
I have one tiny recent memory, because most people here will have known John for decades. I only met him a handful of times in recent years, and he along with Dan and Hannah came to Workington for the Light Festival just before Christmas, and it was just such a joy to see him there, knowing that he wasn't well. And I just will never forget standing under a tree with all the pretty lights around, swigging. Well, he was swigging whiskey. I can't even remember what I was swigging, but he was swigging whiskey out of a hip flask, and I had something else in a hip flask to keep us warm because it was a chilly December night, and just sort of chinking hip flasks with John, and it's just a tiny, tiny, lovely moment of, and I'm sure that all your lives were peppered with many, many of them, but I won't forget it. It was fun and it was joyful and it was sweet.
Thank you, Kate. And I think that is kind of indicative of John, even when it was really hard. I'm going to cry now, but when it was really hard for him and it was really painful physically, and he wasn't well, he would still make the effort to come and support other people. And he came to that gig, didn't he, in Workington. And then my last experience of John in a similar way would be he made this epic trip to London, which was really hard for him. My daughter lives in London as a circus aerialist, and he came to see her perform, and she was performing to a track that you'd created. So she was performing to her uncle's music. She was there looking like young people do, like, wow, amazing physically and extraordinary. And Sue and John were there, and it was just a beautiful kind of coming together of everybody. And I'm so glad he got to make that trip, and it was not easy for him.
And maybe just say we've not really made it public yet, but we're going to have a celebration event for John on the 4th of October at the Grisdale Arts Farmers Arms in Lowick, and we're going to have a circus tent and some, hopefully, Salt the band who played that track for Rosa, and hopefully Rosa will be there doing that performance to Salt the band. But an opportunity to sort of meet friends and maybe talk a little bit and put films and slideshows on and let some fireworks off. And he wanted a Catherine wheel, so I phoned up Gavin Lurie, who was one of the other artists of our generation, and he says, I think I've got a 16-foot Catherine wheel somewhere, so hopefully we'll have that set up as well.
Very much as a celebration.
A celebration, yeah.
That sounds fantastic already. A 16-foot Catherine wheel, what's not to like? I'm sure John would approve.
Yeah.
I'd like to say to Dan and Hannah, thank you so much for sharing so much about your life. I've written a question down here, which I don't need to ask anymore, but how has he influenced you both? Clearly, in the way that you've spoken about him, he's influenced you massively, and in the lives and careers and journeys that you're both on. But I am going to ask the question. Give us a direct answer. John, how's he influenced you both in the way that you lead your lives?
Well, I think just like Zosha said, I feel incredibly fortunate that I earn my living being creative, being work for myself, always have done, and doing projects and linking up with other artists, and the skills and experiences and probably the confidence to be able to do that is instilled from both John and Sue.
Obviously he was our father, and he was also our mentor, and that's the kind of thing I feel like we've lost, father and mentor in these days. I think his biggest influence on me has been respecting the ability to respect play in its best sense of the word, to be able to bring play into your creative act or into just your life, whatever that might be, what you can do, whether it's on the allotment, in the kitchen, or on the stage.
And not to accept the status quo, push back.
Great sentiments. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Hannah. Thank you to everybody who's joined the call this morning. Thank you to everyone for your contributions. We'll be doing some great stuff again next week. I'll put a plan together, but I'm just going to concentrate on this week for now. Thank you for a very special call. There's a recording of this call, so if you wanted to share this with anyone who you think would be interested in watching it, that'll be available later today. But once again, thanks to Dan, to Hannah, and to Sue, and most importantly to John for everything that he's given to this county and the country and beyond, and how his influence absolutely lives on. And maybe some of us might find ourselves in October at the Farmers Arms, who knows. but this is a lovely memory to share together for today. So thank you very, very much, Dan and Hannah. Thanks, everybody.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Yes.